Protocol decoding is what we're talking about in today's episode of the 2-Minute Guru. Thanks for tuning in. Let's take a look. This video is the extended cut of last week's 2 minutes on protocol decoding. It's also the last episode of season 1. We'll kick off season 2 later next year. And next week we're going to kick off the Keysight Oscilloscopes webcast series. More on that at the end of the video. Also recommended is this video, how digital channels work on your oscilloscope, from 2 weeks ago. So first let's talk about how to set up your signals. I'm hooked up today to a CAN bus using analog channel 1. A CAN bus is pretty straightforward, there's only one channel, but if you're using a protocol that has more channels, consider also using a mix of your analog and digital channels. If you expect to maybe have trouble on one of your channels, use the analog channels for that, and then digital channels for signals you're less concerned about. Protocol signals can also be single-ended, meaning there's only one channel with data, or they can be differential, meaning they have two channels with opposite data. So consider using a differential probe if you're using a differential bus. So once you're physically connected to your signals, you're going to want to turn on serial decoding. So I'm going to hit the dedicated serial button, and that's going to turn on my decoding, and I can see along the bottom, I have a little packet view of what's going on this signal. The next thing you're going to want to do from this is make sure your thresholds are set up correctly. So I'm going to use my trigger knob and make sure that my thresholds are kind of right in the middle of my bus there. And that means when I'm sampling, my threshold is going to be appropriate. And then once your thresholds are set up, you're probably going to want to change your trigger. So this scope has a built-in hardware trigger for protocol built into the ASIC. So I'm going to hit the trigger button. And let's change my trigger from an edge trigger, which is how my scope booted, to a serial trigger. So I'm going to select serial down here. And then I'm going to trigger on a start of frame. And now you can see my packet has stabilized on the screen and I have packets coming through. There's other options here. You can see this whole list of different triggers that I have available for a CAN bus. Those options are going to look different for different protocols. But one thing that's really helpful on these scopes is a error frame trigger. This means the scope's going to trigger every time I get an error. It's worth noting that you probably don't want to set it to trigger on an error right away unless you're seeing errors on your system. So let's go back to a starter frame trigger. And you'll notice that there's a lot of dead time on my signal here between packets. So one thing you can do is use segmented memory to just capture packets, and that's going to let you capture a lot more information on your scope. So let's go ahead and set that up. I'm going to first scale into one packet. And I have a full packet on screen, and then I'm going to go to acquire, segmented. My number of segs I'm just going to set to maximum number of segments, and then I'm going to turn that on. And that's going to go through and only capture and store the data that is around a trigger point. So that eliminates all the dead time, and I'm not wasting my memory space with that dead time. And you can see now I've captured 1,000 segments of my signal. And you can see that I've actually captured over 2 seconds of data, 1,000 different packets of information. You're not going to be able to do that on any scope with traditional memory. Segmented memory is great for protocol decoding. You can even set up to trigger on errors and capture 1,000 different errors over time. Once I've captured this information, I can then go ahead and analyze my data. So I can just click on different segments using the touchscreen, and I'm going to go straight to those packets. Another way to analyze data on a scope is using the lister. And the lister is essentially a table of information. And the scope's going to go through and analyze all my segments and put together a list of packets in time with time tags. And I can go through and see how my system is talking. So that took about 15 seconds, and I can scroll through and see my list of data, and I saw an error in there. So I'm going to click on this error, and I've now pulled up this error on my screen. And I can see that this error happened at 2.3 seconds, and it was missing an acknowledge. And this tells me there's potentially something wrong with my system, so I'm going to go back into normal memory mode, and we're going to trigger on errors. So I'm then going to hit trigger, and I'm going to trigger on all errors, and that's going to pull out a list of errors, and I'm just going to zoom out in time and see what we get. And if I pull up my lister, I can see that I'm actually getting a few different errors happening on my system. So let's look at another way to refine that trigger. So one fun way to refine this trigger is I'm going to draw a box and use zone trigger. I'm going to say must not intersect, and I can kind of tune this in a little bit. And you can see now that I've isolated the acknowledge error. If I were to change this to must intersect instead of must not intersect, it's going to show me a different set of errors, and I can move this over. And I can see that this last one, there's a stuff error on my system. So I can now look and see what's going on around those signals and figure out what's causing these errors to happen. So that's it for Protocol Decoding and Season 1. Thank you so much for watching. Next week, we're going to kick off the Keysight Oscilloscopes webcast series, where we take some live webcasts we've done over the past few months, and we're going to present them here on YouTube. Also, Season 2 of the 2-Minute Guru is going to kick off in the fall. Having this break in the summer is going to allow me to make sure that Season 2 is just as good as Season 1, and I'm also going to go kayak the Grand Canyon. If you want to know when Season 2 begins, subscribe to the Keysight Oscilloscopes YouTube channel. And we also have some fun stuff cooking for later this year, so like our Facebook page so you can hear about those when we announce it. And we're going to have new blog posts every week with more scope tips from me, Kenny, Mike, the whole Scopes team, so the link for that is below. Check out the blog. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you later.